There's a war happening right now, and most people have no idea it exists. No tanks, no troops, no declared enemies. But the stakes are higher than almost any conflict in modern history. Countries are stockpiling weapons that look nothing like weapons. Companies are racing to secure resources that most of us have never heard of. And the outcome will determine which nations control the future of energy, technology, and economic power for the next 50 years. This is the critical minerals war, and it's escalating faster than anyone predicted. Lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, graphite. These aren't just materials, they're the foundation of every electric vehicle, solar panel, wind turbine, smartphone, and defense system being built today. Without them, the green energy transition stops, advanced manufacturing collapses, military technology falls behind, the entire digital economy grinds to a halt, and right now, one country controls the majority of global supply chains for almost all of them. That country has been playing a decades-long game while the rest of the world was focused elsewhere. The numbers are staggering. Electric vehicle batteries require 6 times more minerals than conventional cars. A single offshore wind farm needs 9 times more mineral resources than a gas-fired power plant. Global demand for lithium is projected to increase by over 4,000% by 2050. Demand for rare earth elements could rise sevenfold, and the infrastructure to meet this demand doesn't exist yet, not even close. Here's what makes this urgent. Nations that secured mineral supply chains early now hold leverage over nations that didn't. Trade restrictions are already being deployed as economic weapons. Export bans are being quietly implemented. Strategic reserves are being built in secret, and the countries left without access are discovering something terrifying. You can't build the future if someone else controls the materials. This isn't just about electric cars or climate goals. This is about sovereignty. This is about which countries will have functioning economies in 20 years and which will be dependent, vulnerable, negotiating from positions of weakness. The global power structure is being rewritten, not through military dominance, but through control of materials most people can't even pronounce. And the part that nobody's talking about? The scramble has already triggered responses that look less like trade policy and more like preparation for conflict. Here's the mechanism driving everything. For decades, one strategic decision created the conditions for total supply chain dominance. While other nations focused on high-value manufacturing and service economies, one country made a calculated bet: control the messy, polluting, capital-intensive process of mining and refining critical minerals. The rest of the world was happy to outsource it. Environmental regulations made extraction expensive. Labor costs were high. It seemed economically rational to let someone else do the dirty work. That decision is now the single greatest geopolitical vulnerability facing advanced economies. China controls approximately 70% of global rare earth production, 60% of lithium refining, 80% of the chemical processing needed to turn raw minerals into battery-grade materials, nearly all global graphite processing. This isn't just market dominance. This is structural control over the entire supply chain, from mine to finished product. And it was built systematically, through state-supported investment, vertical integration, and long-term planning that competitors didn't match. The psychology behind this is critical. Markets operate on quarterly earnings. Democracies operate on election cycles. But resource security operates on decade-long timelines. By the time competitors realized what was happening, the infrastructure advantage was insurmountable. Mines take 7 to 15 years to develop. Refining facilities require billions in investment. Environmental permitting alone can take a decade. There's no quick catch-up mechanism. And now, every nation trying to build domestic supply chains is discovering they're at least 10 years behind. The stakes become clear when you examine dependency. The European Union imports 98% of its rare earth elements from a single source. The United States imports 80% of its rare earths. Japan, despite its advanced technology sector, has almost no domestic supply. These aren't just statistics, they're pressure points. They're economic choke points that can be squeezed during disputes over trade, over technology transfer, over geopolitical alignment. And it's already happening. Export restrictions have been imposed on critical processing technology. Rare earth exports have been threatened during diplomatic tensions. Companies have been blocked from accessing supply chains after governments took political positions. The message is unmistakable. Mineral access is conditional, and the conditions are geopolitical. But here's the part nobody expected. The countries racing to build alternative supply chains are discovering something darker. The materials they need are increasingly located in places with unstable governments, weak rule of law, and histories of conflict. The Democratic Republic of Congo holds 70% of global cobalt reserves, extracted under conditions that include child labor and armed conflict. Indonesia controls vast nickel deposits, but has environmental standards that would be illegal in most developed nations. Afghanistan sits on rare earth reserves estimated at $1 trillion, now controlled by a government most nations refuse to recognize. The choice is becoming impossible: depend on a strategic rival or source from regions where extraction comes with moral compromise and security risk. Other nations are responding, but the responses reveal just how difficult the problem is. The United States passed the Inflation Reduction Act, allocating hundreds of billions toward domestic battery production and critical mineral supply chains. The European Union launched the Critical Raw Materials Act, aiming to reduce dependency through domestic mining and strategic partnerships. Australia, Canada, and several African nations are being courted as alternative suppliers. Bilateral agreements are being signed at record pace. But the timeline problem remains. Even with unlimited funding, mines don't appear overnight. The Mountain Pass rare earth mine in California, once the world's largest, closed in 2002 due to environmental concerns and competition. It reopened in 2018. It still produces only a fraction of what a single facility in China produces. Canada has cobalt deposits, but lacks refining infrastructure. Australia mines lithium, but ships it overseas for processing. The entire supply chain has to be rebuilt, not just the extraction. Historically, this pattern is familiar. In the 1970s, OPEC's oil embargo demonstrated how resource control translates into geopolitical power. Nations dependent on foreign oil faced economic catastrophe overnight. The response took decades: strategic petroleum reserves, domestic production incentives, alternative energy research. But even 50 years later, oil remains a geopolitical weapon. The difference now? Critical minerals are even more concentrated. OPEC controlled roughly 40% of global oil production at its peak. Current concentration in minerals is far higher. The behavioral economics here are revealing. Nations are making decisions based on perceived urgency, but urgency doesn't change geology or engineering timelines. Political leaders announce ambitious targets: 50% domestic supply by 2030, total supply chain independence by 2040. But industry experts quietly acknowledge these targets are aspirational at best, impossible at worst. The gap between political rhetoric and physical reality is widening, and there's a secondary effect that compounds the problem. As nations compete for limited mineral supply, prices spike. Lithium carbonate prices increased over 500% between 2020 and 2022 before crashing. Cobalt prices doubled. These swings make long-term planning nearly impossible. Companies can't commit to billion-dollar investments when input costs are unpredictable. The volatility creates paralysis precisely when speed is needed. Meanwhile, extraction itself is creating new tensions. Indigenous communities are opposing mines on their land. Environmental groups are challenging permits. Local populations near proposed sites are organizing resistance. The same nations demanding domestic supply chains are discovering their own citizens don't want the environmental cost in their communities. NIMBYism is colliding with national security. It gets deeper. Some nations are taking a different approach entirely. Instead of building supply chains, they're betting on technology that eliminates the need for these materials. Solid-state batteries that use different chemistries. Sodium-ion batteries that avoid lithium entirely. Recycling technologies that extract minerals from old electronics and vehicles. If these technologies scale, the entire mineral war could become irrelevant. But that's a gamble. And right now, the proven technology still requires the materials everyone's fighting over. Here's what this means for ordinary people, and why it matters more than almost any other economic trend happening right now. The cost of everything tied to these minerals is being restructured. Electric vehicles were supposed to become cheaper than gas cars by 2025. That timeline is now uncertain because battery costs aren't falling as predicted. Home solar installations are seeing price increases due to supply chain constraints. Electronics manufacturers are facing unpredictable input costs. The green transition, sold as economically inevitable, is hitting a material wall. For workers, the implications are significant. The promise of green jobs was central to climate policy. But if supply chains remain concentrated offshore, those jobs don't materialize domestically. Manufacturing follows materials. If batteries are made where minerals are processed, assembly jobs follow. The economic benefit of the transition shifts to whoever controls the inputs. Nations that miss this window risk deindustrialization in the sectors that are supposed to define the next economy. For global stability, the risks are more serious than most reporting suggests. Resource scarcity has historically triggered conflict. When nations perceive existential threats to their economic future, diplomacy breaks down. Trade disputes escalate into broader confrontations. Alliances form based on resource access rather than shared values. The world fragments into competing blocs, each trying to secure its own supply chain. Globalization, already under strain, fractures further. But here's the part the media isn't discussing. While everyone focuses on securing today's critical minerals, the definition of critical is already changing. 15 years ago, lithium was barely discussed. 20 years ago, rare earths were niche industrial materials. The minerals considered essential today might be replaced by different materials tomorrow. Graphene, if it scales, could transform electronics. New battery chemistries could eliminate cobalt. Advanced recycling could create closed-loop systems where mining becomes less important. The real race isn't just for today's minerals. It's for the technological breakthroughs that make them obsolete. And that race is happening in laboratories, not mines. The nation that solves material science challenges first doesn't need to control supply chains. They make existing supply chains irrelevant. That's a different kind of power, and it's far more durable. There's also a darker possibility being discussed in policy circles, but rarely in public. If alternative supply chains can't be built fast enough, and if technological breakthroughs don't arrive in time, some nations might conclude they have no choice but to secure resources through more aggressive means. Not military occupation, but economic coercion that looks increasingly like it. Debt trap infrastructure deals, conditional aid packages, joint ventures that transfer control without transferring ownership. The tools of influence are being deployed quietly, and the targets are nations sitting on deposits they lack the capital to develop alone. The pattern emerging is this: the transition to clean energy, presented as a global cooperative effort, is instead becoming a competitive scramble where early movers gain permanent advantages and late movers face structural dependency. The winners will build the future, the losers will buy it at prices and on terms they don't control. Because while the world is focused on which countries can secure lithium and cobalt today, the real transformation is already unfolding in the laboratories and boardrooms where tomorrow's materials are being designed, tested, and prepared to make this entire war obsolete before most people even realize it's happening.